Welcome to the Feminist Frame, where we explore our favorite new movies, TV shows, games, and anything pop culture through a feminist lens. I'm Olivia, here with Aubrey to discuss the new movie, Mary Queen of Scots, starring Saoirse Ronan and Margot Robbie in Oscar-worthy performances. In a time of kings, two queens rose to power in neighboring lands. Both young and ambitious, Mary Queen of Scotland and Elizabeth, the Queen of England, are engaged in a power struggle over the claims to the English throne and line of succession.
All right, Olivia, so what did you think of the film?
I actually thoroughly enjoyed it. I am a huge fan of historical, documentaries, and therefore, all these historical period piece movies. I love them.
And this is such, obviously, King Henry VIII has a million things, different versions and books and movies about him and the Tudors, but I think that this is just Mary Queen of Scots is such a good story in and of itself that totally deserves its own feature-length movie. I'm really glad to see it. Everything from her rise to power, her young life, and I would even have liked to see more of the things in France, but it's so dramatic. There's no really dull moments at all.
Well, and I was actually thinking about how this story, it's been told before, but I'm not sure, if it's quite on anything on the scale until in sort of recent years. But I was kind of thinking about, do you think it's because they didn't believe that, these two female characters could hold a movie, hold the attention, draw the crowds?
Oh, absolutely. The director and writer, Josie Rourke, has apparently been kicking this screenplay around Hollywood for about 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And only recently found,
I didn't know that, Ed Taker. Yeah, that's makes a lot of sense.
Which, I'm kind of almost glad that the struggle took her so long, because I do think that Saoirse Ronan is perfect for...
And Margot Robbie, if this was 10 years ago, who would we have in these roles?
Yeah, exactly. Margot Robbie was such a surprise for me. I liked her in I, Tonya. I think she's really good, but I just didn't expect her to have quite the acting chops that she apparently does. She really showed me.
And I think this movie, it's called Mary Queen of Scots, so I think it was trying to focus and really play up Mary's character, but I just think Margot stole every scene she was in.
Absolutely.
With her portrayal of Elizabeth.
It was so good. I couldn't get over her. And, the makeup was really well done. Although only on Margot Robbie for some reason.
Yeah, you kind of didn't get to see Saoirse Ronan, age at all. The span of this movie is something like 25 years. And I think she just looks the same through the entire thing. So
they really, the pox scars and everything. And we even talked about it. I obviously, I'm also a history buff. I didn't know that Elizabeth had the pox. I thought she just liked painting her face weird.
I was actually really glad older. They threw that in too, because I was like, is that the reason why this happened?
Yeah, apparently it was to cover these brutal scars. I had no idea. And I did know, the wigs were because she was losing her hair with age, but I didn't know about that. And that makes her so much more personable, I guess. And also, in a way for you to experience just one aspect of being a woman with surrounded by all these powerful men. If you think about, women politicians nowadays, Hillary always talks about how much harder it is. She has to get her hair done and look a certain way, things like that. I'm sure it was that way in that time too.
Oh, for sure. You can't look like a frail woman up there taking charge of the most powerful country in the world.
Absolutely. So I thought that was a really interesting theme that reached out into today that I had never thought about with Elizabeth I before.
Quick side note, I was doing a little research after I saw the movie about the makeup because I wanted to, it's like, was it from the box? Yes, okay.
I went into such a long Wikipedia hole.
Yeah. But did you read about how the makeup was basically like a lead-based paint?
Yeah.
So, like, the more she used it, the sicker she got, and then the thicker she had to apply it. So just like, that could also account for like losing hair and like all of these other like ailments. Like, she was just poisoning herself over and over and over again, and they just had to like cover a thicker layer on top to cover up.
It's terrifying.
Yeah. It's pretty insane. The lengths that women go through.
Right? Which is obviously, an ancient theme.
Mm-hmm. So what about some of the historical points? You're talking about being a history buff and, going through this whole internet fact check search after the fact. What was your take on some of the points that the movie was making that maybe disagree a little bit, or at least is not the main story you get from the history of these two women?
So obviously it wanted to show Elizabeth as slightly more sympathetic toward Mary's position, and also maybe a little bit more emotional. And I think part of that might have been like this way to try to humanize this like ancient figure that does seem very severe in paintings and portrayals of her. But I don't know. I think it was an interesting idea. I could absolutely understand why she would have some sympathy for Mary, even if she was trying to take her throne. Just because the only other woman of this time that would understand what it's like to be her, to be the female heir to the throne, trying to hold on to power with all of these men around you.
For sure.
And I think I did say this when we got left in the car after the movie, that it reminded me a little bit of Cersei, in Game of Thrones, and especially like in the books when there's a reason why she's so paranoid.
For sure.
It's because everyone is trying to take power from her.
In that respect, I love one of my favorite scenes was whenever Margot Robbie's talking to her advisors, and they're again like, she's a Catholic, like we can't do that, da 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 da, and she's like, well, what would be so bad about it? Like, look at all she's done so far. Could any of you do any better? And she kind of just like shuts them up, for that moment in time, where that's kind of when you really start to see like her sympathizing with Mary.
Yeah, and I think, as far as, like, what I've read, Mary really did kind of, that scene, the meeting, which also is another bit of where they're taking artistic some liberties, for sure. But, of course, they have to meet each other. It's about those two, at least for cinematic purposes. But, when she's trying to ask for help and ask for sympathy, Mary's still pushing her and saying, I am your rightful queen. Because she really did believe that because, divorce wasn't legal. So Elizabeth, by any right, was a bastard.
Especially for Catholic these eyes. Super devout Catholics.
In any Catholic's eyes, she was a bastard and had no claim to the throne. And Mary, Queen of Scots, Mary Stuart, would have been the next in line. Mm-hmm. But the idea that Mary was involved in some of these schemes while she was under house arrest for 20 years, most people think didn't happen. There would have been no opportunity. And even in some of the things that I read, there are some accounts that they might have actually tricked or really pushed Elizabeth into eventually executing her.
Oh, I definitely did read that. Some historians are like, she actually didn't like sign, know what she was signing.
Yeah, at the time, that she thought she was signing something else. And I mean, I think the fact that she held her in prison for so long, because obviously her advisors wanted to execute her on the spot. She was the only other threat to the throne.
For sure.
So I think the fact that she held her in captivity for so long and very comfortably under house arrest for 20 years really kind of does support the idea that Elizabeth wasn't keen on the idea
But do you think that necessarily discounts any plotting that Mary was doing beforehand? Because Mary was super ambitious. She wanted that throne.
Yeah, she also at that point had her son and heir who was going to become the King of England afterwards. I don't doubt that she would have been ambitious and wanting to get out, but I guess like it's more about opportunity, right? And like I guess the biggest thing is more so that she was, as long as she was alive, she was a symbol for Catholics for them to plot to try to free her, which was what scared the advisors to Elizabeth and Elizabeth herself. So I think the idea would have more so been just that, you know, she was a symbol, but I don't think she was really like, you know, doing the dirty work as far as the plotting goes.
See, I always felt like straight off the gate, like once she gets back to Scotland after, you know, her husband, the King of France, dies. She doesn't have, you know, the French kingdom anymore. So she comes back over and she's like, you know what? I see that throne. I want it. And then
it's hers.
Kicks things off.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just more like, what are you going to tell your maids? You know, like that's, she could have been, but there wasn't really evidence that she really had anything to go off of. And she would have been at that point plotting against her son, you know, 20 years later. By that time, he was king. So maybe, but I think that's one of those things that we just really can't know.
So what did you think of the non-traditional casting? There was definitely actors of color that were in the roles as members of the court or the ladies in waiting. Also, Elizabeth's ambassador that she kept sending over to Mary in Scotland, you know, was an actor of color. However, is sort of non-traditional because at that time there probably wasn't this many people of color in like such prominent roles.
Right. England was probably significantly diverse as it is today, but it's doubtful that there would have been so many people of color in the court.
So in that sense, you know, it's this non-traditional because it's maybe not historically accurate, which honestly, like, I'm totally down for, you know. However, it didn't like extend throughout the entire cast. You know, if you're going to go this non-traditional casting route, where you just, you know, it's sort of like a play where you cast, you know, whoever's just best for the role, best character actor.
Right. Now, I think it's nice to not have this all lily white cast, but I also, it is sort of colorblind just in that, like, I think, I don't know, maybe like white men in history need to own the decisions because they were the ones making them, you know? But no, it's definitely nice to see a diverse cast in a historical movie.
So how do you feel about, I'm going to call them yes, queen, yes moments?
Yes.
For Saoirse Ronan's character. Queen Mary is this very progressive seeming, forward-thinking woman. You know, she's just outright in your face, like fully accepting of all religions, as well as like all gender nonconformities. Like no problem, any of those scenes. Like, how much of that do you think was real, and how much is that playing to us as a 21st century audience wanting to see that in our historical characters?
So I actually, once again, went down a long Wikipedia and then documentary wormhole with this, and by all accounts, she was overly forgiving, especially of religions, of people getting to practice, and almost to an annoying point. Like this whole thing with John Knox, played by David Tennant, who was her chief, you know, critic. He was like calling her a harlot in the streets, and I'm like, dude, it's the medieval times. Why don't you just freaking off him? You know, if you really want to stay in power, maybe that's what you should do for these times. Obviously, I don't think that now. But it was just like, why wouldn't you do that? But she really wanted to be a judicious leader, I think. And by all accounts, she really was like that. She was very charismatic. She was really funny and likable. Apparently, the king of France, when she went there as a child and was betrothed to his